Carolyn Dube here. What's the play for today? Well, today I'm making art houses. And even though the inside of these look very loose and serendipitous, kind of random, they weren't. I did not leave it up to chance what was going to be inside these houses, and you'll see how I do that using a stencil and a mask. And you're also going to see why I'm really grateful that I played a whole lot of Tetris when I was younger. Of course, there's also an oops with that, but, well, isn't there always an oops when I'm playing? All right, so we've got lots to do in this video, so let's dive on in. This is a randomly made piece of painted paper. Some of this was leftover paint, some of it was intentional. It's just messing around. And to create one of these, all you do is create a piece of paper and just start putting some paint on it. You may already have something in your stash that you've got a background started, that kind of thing that you can do this technique with. To do the houses, I'm going to be using both the mask and the stencil here from this month's Stencil Club set. Now, all of these houses, they have windows in them, and I don't want the windows for this technique, so I'm going to cover them up. I'm just going to take a piece of washi tape, and I'm going to put that over the windows. And you might think, oh my goodness, she's wasting washi tape. Not really, because this is washi tape that came in a multi-pack. I really don't like the color of it that much, so it's probably not going to get used any other way. But another option for you is something like painter's tape, any kind of low-tech or repositionable kind of tape, Post-it note, that kind of thing. And of course, if you don't want to cover the windows, you have that option too. I am going to use the stencil and the mask together so that I know what I'm going to get before I stencil it, rather than just leaving it to luck or chance or pure serendipity. When I put the stencil down, I'm auditioning the space inside the houses. So what I'm doing is looking at how the paint is flowing in there, what kind of colors, shapes, that kind of thing. And once I find the spot where I want that house to be, then I'm going to bring in the mask. Now, the first time that I use the mask, I'm going to create one of those little tape circles to put on the back of it, because that's going to just lightly hold it in place. I'm going to put the mask down on top of the stencil. I'm going to fit it in there almost like a little jigsaw puzzle. And then I'm going to hold the mask with my finger and remove the stencil. So now it is perfectly positioned. I know what's going to be under there, and I can add the paint around it. I do want some crisp lines when I'm doing this, so I'm doing a couple of things to help myself get really crisp lines as I'm stenciling. One of them is I'm using a thick paint. It's a heavy body paint. Another thing that I'm doing is I'm going in an up and down motion. That's going to help keep the paint from leaking underneath the stencil. And then the third thing that is really helpful is to use a small amount of paint. Use the least amount of paint that you can to get the look that you want. Probably not going to come as any surprise to you that if you're using a dark paint and you're using a small amount of paint, you may have to go over it a second time if you want super solid coverage. And I really do want super solid coverage. So that's why I'm kind of touching up some areas here just to make sure it's as dark as it can be. Once I've got all that paint on there, then it's time to lift up that mask and reveal the house that's underneath. So now I've got one house done. I want to fill this entire page with houses. So I'm going to bring the stencil back and I'm going to start auditioning other areas to become houses. And as I'm looking around, if something doesn't jump out at me, one of the things that I do is I turn the paper. Because sometimes just seeing it from a different angle, you'll notice something that you might not have the other way. And that's what's happening here. On this one, I'm going to do it with the windows not covered up. So I'm just going to put a little piece of tape on the back to kind of hold it in place, but I'm going to make sure that I can actually stencil through all of the windows. Now, these windows, when I was designing the stencils, were such a source of paralysis because I really went back and forth of, do I put the windows in there or do I not? Because there are a lot of techniques that I don't want the windows for, and then there are just as many techniques that I do want the windows for. And I couldn't decide which way to go. And my issue with commitment there, my struggle to decide one or the other, actually pushed me to find a way to have both. I mean, spoiler alert, you know how it turned out. They have the windows on them. But the thing that I realized is it really is easy just to cover up those windows if you don't want them with like that washi tape or a Post-it note or something like that. So in the end, my wish to not have to choose pushed me towards finding an answer where I could have all the options that I wanted. I have the option to have windows, like what you're seeing me do on this house, and I have the option to cover up the windows like what you saw me do on the last house. Now that you know how this process works, I'm going to repeat it a whole bunch of times. So I've sped up the camera here because, well, this does take a while to fill the entire page with these houses. This is the stage in the play that I credit Tetris completely for. And that video game that I played so much when I was in high school that I absolutely loved getting all those little blocks to fit together, that is exactly what I'm going to have to do on here. Moving things around, trying different houses in different places. 1, to find a house that I find interesting. And then 2, to use up as much of the colorful painted area of this as possible. Let's talk about that black space that I'm putting around each one. Why am I putting so much of it there? Well, that's because of how I'm going to use these houses. I want to use them as elements in art journals, on cards and collages, that kind of thing. So I want that colorful part I've selected to be in the middle of the house, and then I want a border and edge, a frame kind of thing in black. So I want to leave enough space between each house so that I can relatively easily cut them out. As I'm doing this, there is a little bit of a dance between exactly where I want to position a house and how much space there is. So if I find just the right spot where it makes me really happy to have the house positioned, and if it's a little closer than maybe is ideal next to the house next to it, I'm going to put it there. Because all that means is I just have to be a little creative when I'm cutting these out with scissors. And speaking of being creative, you can also get creative with what you want to use for the base. I've got colorful painted paper here, and you can use anything that you've got for the base. Imagine doing this with book text or gel prints. Now, those are the 2 ideas that popped into my head first, but I have a sneaky suspicion there are a whole lot of possibilities out there. Now, if you've got an idea in your mind of something that could be used for the base, go ahead and leave it down in the comments, because for anybody that's kind of wondering what they might have that they can use for this, then they can go check through the comments, read through for some ideas and inspiration. And I'm just going to say thank you in advance for helping out your fellow creatives. That's one of the things I really love about our community is how much we support and encourage each other. When I put the first house or 2 on this page, it was actually pretty easy to pick where they would go because there was not much on here. Probably not going to surprise you one bit that it gets a little more challenging the more stuff that is on the page. The more things that are there, the more I have to kind of turn the paper, audition in different places to find houses that are interesting that fit in the open spaces that I have. I could stop at any point and say that's enough houses, but I am just driven to use every last bit of color that I can on this one. One thing that I keep bringing on camera and I haven't talked about yet is the palette that I'm using there for the paint. I'm using a 3x5 gel press plate. And the reason why I love to use those is 1, they're very handy to have around. They don't take up much space. And the other reason is once I'm all done playing for the day, I can actually take a gel print using the paint that's on that palette. That means the paint that's left on a palette never has to be wasted. The house stencils that I'm using here, these are a part of Stencil Club for this month with a collection called Art House. And Stencil Club is over at StencilGirlProducts.com. And if you're already in Stencil Club, you know that on the 15th of the month, these things will be shipped out to you, and there will be an exclusive members-only video in there by the designing artist for that month, which I'm excited to say is me. And what we're going to be doing in that video, in case you're wondering, is we are going to be using these stencils for gel printing. If you're new to Stencil Club and you'd like to find out more about it, I've got a link down below for you where you can check out all the details and get signed up at StencilGirlProducts.com. The neighborhood here, well, it's starting to fill up. Not a lot of real estate left on here to fill in. And this is where having that black border around the houses can be very handy. So as I put the mask on here and as I bring that sponge around, I'm adding the black. Having those borders around the other houses gives me a little bit of space where I don't have to worry about covering up any of the design on these or worrying about masking those up. So just keep that in mind as you're putting that black around each one of the masks. And also too, having that black space around it will make it easier when you're cutting things out because each one of these is going to get cut out in an approximate rectangle around it. Okay, here comes the last house that I can squeeze on here. And which one I go with is really chosen this time by how much space there is. Even though those are all the houses, it doesn't mean everything is covered up with black yet. So any of the leftover little areas here and there, I'm just going to take that cosmetic sponge and cover them up with black paint. Now apparently I was very eager to get to the cutting them out stage because I thought I had covered all the exposed color with black paint and I realized, oops, I missed a little spot over there. That's not the only oops that's going to happen here. You're about to see another one. Now cutting out each of these houses is going very smoothly. I can comfortably cut around each of them so that they're in their own rectangle, so I don't have to cut off any parts of the house. After all, that is why I made sure that there was plenty of black space around each one of these. My confidence at this point was very high. I was feeling really good that I was going to be able to cut out every one of these houses just with a nice, wonderful black rectangle around them. I bet you can tell that there's going to be a problem cutting some of these out. But it's not the end of the world. It's not a big problem. It's simply an oops, an outstanding opportunity presenting suddenly. Every house up until this point has been able to be cut out in some kind of rectangle. And this one, nope, not going to happen. It's not going to be possible to get both of these out in a rectangle. But I can get one of them out in a mostly rectangle shape. So I'm going to do that for one of them, and then the opportunity is going to come on the other. Because every time things don't work out, there's always an opportunity in there. So with this one, what I'm going to do is I'm just going to trim it really closely to the edge so it ends up with a thin black line around the house. And now there are two ways to do this. One with that thin black line, or you can go with the nice big wide black border like I did on the others. Now this video is already running a bit long, so there isn't time to show you how I made this entire art journal page, but I think you can get the idea of it from looking at it. Colorful background, and then 3 houses glued along there, and then some words up above. The words that I've got on there are art house, that is where we like to play. Well, thanks so much for joining me for today's play. If you've had fun, if you enjoyed this video, I'd so appreciate it if you gave it a thumbs up. And of course, if you want to see more of my videos, hit that subscribe button. That way you'll know as soon as I've got a new one out. And if you'd like to know more about Stencil Club and the Art House Collection, you can find all the details over at StencilGirlProducts.com. Thanks so much for letting me be a part of your colorful journey.